Happy new league NFL year, Bengals fans. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and I am Anthony Cosenza. Happy to be joined by my comrade in arms, Scott Schulze. We'll get to him in just a second. There is a ton to get to tonight on this week's episode as we coincide this program with the start of official start of free agency, even though the teams have been talking to guys and working some things out over the past couple of days. The new league year is upon us, and the Cincinnati Bengals have made headlines in a number of different ways. Actually, believe it or not, in the form of one major addition, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So, but as I mentioned, I'm with my good pal Scott Schulze, and Scott, you're wearing a very festive shirt tonight. For those of you who are not joining us live on the video part of the stream, he's wearing a very festive Bengals-like shirt tonight. How are you feeling about things in general? Well, first of all, how you doing, buddy?
I'd say doing good. Yeah, the shirt is, if you're watching this in black and white, which I don't imagine anyone is, it may just look dirty, but it's actually, it was a orange and black and white kind of tie-dye shirt that my wife and son made for me last year when they were tie-dyeing as like a Bengals shirt. It was kind of a surprise for my birthday. So I think I may have worn it once or twice before on this podcast, but yeah, so that's been good. Yeah, forget your other question. Yeah, you asked for the Bengals.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, it's been a very it seems like it's been a very Bengal-esque season or new season, league year, whatever, calendar, Bengals or NFL calendar, NFL year so far. Except for the one thing you mentioned, the Cordy Glenn. Otherwise, it's been subtractions and attrition. But yeah, that's kind of been the one big headline that has stolen a lot of been very positive. I mean, obviously, a lot of Bengals fans are pretty stoked about that, about adding a player.
Yeah, adding a player in general from another organization outside of their own. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Bengals players who were either signed elsewhere, the Bengals players who have yet to find a market or a home, and other different kinds of rumors and interesting news that have been circulating around the Cincinnati Bengals over the past few days. And really, a lot of stuff happened Wednesday, as we kind of expected it to. Free agency now, the kickoff of free agency, which is a Wednesday. Sometimes it used to be that the frenzy of news, and right when it started, well, as teams can kind of talk to players for a couple days prior to the actual onset of free agency, you kind of get some contracts worked out, and news isn't as breaking, but there's still a flurry of it, and there was on the first day of free agency. But let's talk about something that the Bengals actually did a couple of days ago, Scott, and it was landing a trade for offensive tackle Cordy Glenn. There's a lot of people out there that once the Bills made it public that they were going to shop Cordy Glenn this year, there are a lot of people who essentially said this could be a very good fit for the Bengals. They have a needed offensive tackle, offensive lineman. Cordy Glenn is very good when healthy. When healthy is the big thing here, but good player. And hey, the Bengals didn't go out and sign Nate Solder or make these splashy moves, kind of since. But this is a $10 million a year guy essentially for the Cincinnati Bengals, a starting left tackle, which is hard to find. It opens up the draft for him. Good move, I think. Unless you have some different thoughts. I mean, obviously, draft positioning and all of that is affected.
Yeah, I mean, as far as it's a very good move because we saw what happened when they lost Whitworth last year, how the offensive line just kind of fell apart. The Boyhe and Fisher thing obviously didn't take off. They had to bring Winston back. They had to move Andre Smith from right guard to right tackle and even though left tackle. And yeah, it was a mess. I mean, the whole offense was a mess. There are obviously many issues with that, but part of it was the absence of Whitworth. They had to find something. And, it's a very good move for a team like the Bengals who don't want to break the bank because you have this guy essentially for, 3 years, $30 million where they can get out after any year. So it's $10 million a year, which I think is cheaper than Whitworth. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than what Solder got. And when healthy, I want to make sure I had that caveat. When he's healthy, Cordy Glenn is pretty much, one of the top, better left tackles in the league. He's a guy who's, above average. He's not going to be probably an all-pro, but he is very good. He's a guy a lot of Bengals fans were kind of looking at, hoping for when he first entered the league 5 years ago. Yeah. And he's from Georgia. So that seems to be that fits the Bengals thing. They like the SEC. They love Georgia. He kind of fits that. He's in with Bowling, in with AJ Green, Geno Atkins. So kind of right where you'd want to be. And the other thing is it kind of tells you that where they were picking it, in the top 12 spots, they really didn't feel there was a left tackle. And I would have to agree. You're looking at how the evaluations were for the guys this year, some of the top guys. McGlinchey from Notre Dame kind of fell from a high first to maybe a high second. Orlando Brown fell from a high first completely off, day one and maybe day two. So, you're sitting there at 10 or 12, or, looking at where you're at in the draft. You're thinking, okay, maybe we like the other guy from Georgia, Isaiah Wynn, or maybe we like some of these other people, Colton from UCLA or whoever, but maybe not that high. Well, now you have, Cordy Glenn, who's better than probably anyone they were going to get day one. If you're trying to win this year, next year, he's probably going to give you that better than anyone else is. So not only are you not using that high pick for him, you're using that high pick, you're getting a left tackle was probably better, and you're still getting pick 21. And you're getting this guy, for, a reasonable price. I mean, it does eat up some of the salary cap, some of the free money, but what they would have had to pay to really fix the problem, I think this is by far the best move economically, and it still gives them the draft capital. They still have a first-round pick. They actually move up later in the draft too. So all around, as long as he's healthy, it seems like a great move for the Bengals offensive line, and does a lot of things to open up that offense, to give Andy Dalton time to throw the ball, Joe Mixon, hopefully some lanes. I mean, yeah, there's really no negative you could say, unless you're Cedric Ogbuehi, because now you're fighting for your spot on the roster.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. But Cordy Glenn, 28 years old, the Bengals have him for 3 years. And the great news is, even though they're paying him, a pretty substantial amount of money, averaging around $10 million a year. I think that it, depending on which year it is, but overall, it's essentially a 3-year, $30 million type of contract. And the Bengals don't have penalties if they need to get out of the contract, say after year 1 or year 2. They don't have a penalty. There's no cap hit for them to do that. So in that respect, it also is a good deal. Now, the issues with Glenn is, as you kind of alluded to, and he was rewarded with the massive contract extension by the Bills after playing and at a high level, after playing 3 straight years and starting and playing all 16 games from 2013 to 2015. He missed 5 games in 2016, and then he played in just 6 games last year. So obviously, after being a very durable player, there are concerns with his durability since signing the big deal. But he had an ankle procedure done this offseason. So hopefully, I think, a lot of people are thinking that, things will be cleaned up and he should be good to go for the Bengals, and hopefully stay pretty healthy. Scott, you had mentioned Andrew Whitworth. We threw up a poll on our Twitter account at Bengals OBI. So if you're on Twitter, please give us a follow. But we threw up a poll asking, and should the Bengals have just kept Andrew Whitworth, even though he now is 35 years old and got a pretty big deal from the Rams? Should they have kept him? Are they better off with Cordy Glenn, or is it kind of a coin flip? I don't know. 47% of the voters said they should have paid Whitworth. 32% said they're better off with Cordy Glenn right now, and 21% said they were unsure. Where do you sit on that, my friend?
I think, without knowing the health, because obviously it's hard to guess if a guy is going to be healthy or not, I would probably lean towards the Whitworth thing, only because he was reliable. He was a locker room leader. You saw some of the things that happened early last year with people players calling out the coaching, calling out each other. There seemed to be dysfunction in the locker room. And one thing you'd heard for the last decade is Whitworth was one of those team leader kind of guys, one of those guys that, not only was great on the field, but was great in the locker room, kind of kept things together, was a leader on the team. So you have that, plus you have a guy who's proven, who's healthy. Yeah, he is near the end of his career. He probably would have finished as a Bengal. It would have been great to have 16 games of that. I think Glenn, if he's healthy, is probably a little better of a deal because he is younger, and you could get him for more years. You get him for the 3, and then you could extend him beyond that. So, but without knowing his health, I think I'd have to go Whitworth just because I think he's more of a proven commodity and more of a leader as far as we know. I mean, obviously we don't know as much about Glenn, but from what we know of Whitworth on and off the field, he seems to be a great presence on the team.
Agreed. And, you also mentioned another mainstay on the Bengals line over the past handful of years, Clint Bowling, who was really one of their offensive MVPs last year. He played left tackle at Georgia while Cordy Glenn played guard, and then Glenn slid over and played tackle after Bowling had left. So those two guys very familiar with each other and will be anchoring the left side of the line. Now, you also, Scott, alluded to the fact that this now clouds the futures of Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher. I like this Glenn move for a number of reasons. Number one, it's very anti-Bengals in terms of spending some pretty big coin even though it was a trade, it's kind of a version of free agency, right? So spending some pretty big coin and getting a starter instead of, a rotational player or a role player or, they lost a major guy and then they kind of had to bring in another guy, which we've seen them do before. This was just a straight upgrade over what they currently had on the roster. So you got to like that. The other thing is, we've seen the Bengals get especially with their offensive linemen, very stubborn about these are the guys we're sticking with. And, there's names galore we could throw out, especially in the Paul Alexander era. But you mentioned, Scott, that we don't know what's going on with Fisher and Ogbuehi right now. Obviously, it seems now that one of those two guys would probably be vying for the starting right tackle spot. But I like that the Bengals, they weren't pleased with the development with Ogbuehi over the past 3 years. Jake Fisher, same kind of deal. And then he has the heart issue this last offseason. So they kind of said, we can't wait around. But it would seem that those two guys probably will be trying to start at right tackle, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to assume, and they did say Fisher, I guess, was past the irregular heartbeat, his recovery, and so he should be ready for playing in practice. But that being said, he obviously wasn't great when he was healthy, and then he does have this. So you don't know if it's going to flare up. You don't want to aggravate it, and you don't know what decisions he's going to make for his health. Maybe he is fully healthy, but maybe he comes back in training camp and is too much stress on the heart, and he decides, I just need. So, with that, it's obviously an unknown. With Ogbuehi, he struggled on the right side, and then left side. You hope another year, is obviously another opportunity to get better. But with him, I think one thing I'd like to throw out, because this is something you mentioned, I think, a couple episodes ago, and this is obviously before they traded for Glenn, was the idea of moving Ogbuehi inside.
Yeah, to guard.
Yeah. And one thing I would move it even a step further and say, because he was so much better at guard than he was at center or at tackle at college. And in the NFL, he's obviously had the same struggles. And the biggest struggle seems to be the guys getting around him when the guys seem to get ahead of steam. He just has no technique or feel for the position and gets eaten up. But if he's engaged like 101 at the point of attack, he seems to be okay. It's just more when guys are charging at him, he doesn't know how to handle that. And one thing is, but if he's strong enough, and I know core strength was kind of an issue when he entered the draft, but he, supposedly is getting a little better with that. I'd like to see him fight for the center spot because he's only 6'4", 300. Dallas, the guy we got from Dallas, Frank Pollock, the center they have there, Travis Frederick, is 6'3". So you're about the same height. He's not too tall for the position. He can engage a guy at the point of attack. I went back and watched a lot of his college video when he was playing guard and tackle of Ogbuehi and kind of see, is this totally absurd? He seems to have a good enough strength to be able to turn defensive tackles to get. I mean, he's not going to blow him off the ball, but he doesn't get driven in the backfield. Like when you watch Cedric Bodine's college tape, every play. Sorry, yeah, Russell Bodine.
That would be the ultimate hybrid offensive lineman. Cedric Bodine.
He is constantly living in the back. I mean, but Bodine would be a great defensive tackle because he's always in the backfield. Unfortunately, he's a center. But Ogbuehi doesn't seem to have that issue. I might be saying this. Obviously, I don't know if it would work, but it's something I'd like to see him try. I don't think it could be any worse than what the Bengals had. He's fairly athletic. I think he is strong enough. I think he's shown that he can handle the guys one-on-one, and in that limited space, they can't get around him because they're just going to bump into the right guard or the left guard. So I'd say if it was me, obviously it's not me, but if it was me coaching them, I'd say, hey, let's try Ogbuehi at center. We know he can't handle right tackle and right guard. It's kind of up for grab. Trey Hopkins, Westerman, Redmond, whoever, throw him at the wall and see what sticks. Kent Perkins, whatever, draft pick, whoever it is.
You heard it here first, folks. Scott Schulze lobbying for Cedric Ogbuehi at center. Not a bad idea, I guess, in theory. My problem is that's not something I think you can rely on in terms of, hey, Cedric Ogbuehi starting center for the Bengals in 2018. Now maybe it's kind of an experiment thing where he now is a backup and he backs up maybe both tackle spots, maybe right guard, and then maybe he's a backup center. He's just kind of a really a utility player, and he is an athletic guy, but power and punch as an offensive lineman have been a major issue with Cedric Ogbuehi. But I'm inclined to think that the Bengals, I don't think they're going to cut bait with him yet, and the Bengals, and we'll get to this in a minute, but the Bengals lost Andre Smith in free agency, so maybe now Cedric Ogbuehi is kind of that swing tackle guard guy that they always keep, and Eric Winston or whatever, and he's just younger and maybe has a little more upside as a backup swing guy. Maybe that's what Ogbuehi is relegated to at this point in his career, but you would think that the team will probably give both he and Fisher shots to win jobs at either right guard or right tackle, depending on how this offseason goes. We saw a lot of rumblings in the YouTube chat about Will Hernandez at number 21 overall. Now that's the pick that the Bengals got in the trade with Buffalo for Cordy Glenn. There's talk of, you mentioned Isaiah Wynn, Scott. There's, Billy Price, a guy that a lot of local people like a lot. Unfortunately, he has a partially torn pec that he suffered at the combine. So that's going to hurt his stock a little bit, but a good interior lineman that the Bengals could use. So maybe they weren't enamored with tackles in this draft. And I think there's a major connection personally with Orlando Brown and Marvin Lewis. And Orlando Brown, for lack of better words, kind of crapped the bed at the NFL Combine. He was absolutely awful. He did have his pro day on Wednesday and improved on that, on a lot of those numbers. But I think he at least hurt his stock a round or two with his lack of performance there. But the Bengals get a starting left tackle and a pretty good one. So, as long as he stays healthy, that left side of the line now with he and Bowling should be a pretty decent side. And then the Bengals kind of figure out what they do with the rest of the positions going forward. But, probably the big news and probably the biggest figuratively and literally player the Bengals will get this offseason, especially in free agency. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined by Scott Schulze. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. I know that it's a busy night for a lot of folks, both personally and keeping the eyes on the news as well. We're here to talk about all of the news and notes with the Cincinnati Bengals and free agency, what's happened so far. We just talked about Cordy Glenn landing with the Bengals in a trade. So in case you've been living in a bomb shelter the past couple of days, the Bengals have a new left tackle, and they swung a pretty interesting trade with the Bills for that. You can get that information, all of the ins and outs on it, analysis on cincyjungle.com. You can also get this program there. You can get it on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube. You can get in touch with us on via Twitter at BengalsOBI, via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. And we will be taking some listener questions at the end here. And I know there's a lot of questions and a lot of things going on in fans' minds right now. I guess kind of continuing on the positive side, the retaining of players, the re-signing of players. This is a typical Bengals free agency move, Scott. They re-signed their punter, and that's a big free agency signing. You know what? I kid, but Kevin Huber's been a solid player for them for a while, and he signed a 3-year extension. Apparently, Chicago was very pursuing him pretty heavily, and the Bengals got him for 3 years. You wrote a piece on Cincy Jungle kind of talking about Kevin Huber, his value. Obviously, the punter position is sometimes undervalued in Cincinnati. You kind of talk about that post and your thoughts on the Huber re-signing in Cincinnati.
Well, one, I guess the interesting thing is now the two most longest consecutively tenured Bengals are the long snapper Clark Harris and the punter Kevin Huber. So take that for what it's worth. I guess one good thing as far as this goes would be, as far as the long snapper and as far as the punter, that if you don't hear anything about them during the season, it's probably good news. Those are generally positions that if they aren't screwing anything up, you're pretty much happy. It's kind of like your car. I mean, if you don't hear the brakes, you kind of know they're working. If you don't see the check engine light, the things that, and that seems to be how these positions tend to get treated. And I think that's one of the things with Huber is that he's, not a elite punter. He's not going to finish in the top 5. And you look at his numbers historically, as far as his net average, his gross average, his percentage of times he pins people in. And that's kind of what I had kind of in the post was essentially that, hey, you look at, his numbers compared to the rest of the league, he's kind of like the Andy Dalton of punters. He's pretty much league average. He's good. There's guys who are better, guys who are worse. But you take like the top 20, 25 punters, and you kind of look at their numbers. They're very similar. They are all within a yard or two of their average. Some are a little better, some are a little worse as far as pinning guys in the 10, inside the 20. He wasn't one of the better at that this year. You could argue it's because they never got close enough for him to try to pin anyone in. And generally, guys who have longer punts because they're punting further away, pinned guys back less. And, if you look at the average, the guys who had shorter punts than him did a better job of keeping people from reaching. So anyway, when it's all said and done, he's a league average, he's a decent, he does what you want him to do. Kind of like Clark Harris, he snaps the ball, it gets to who it's supposed to get to. That's, now though I guess Clark Harris did set that record at the Pro Bowl. So maybe he's a little more elite. Yep. So he has that going for him, but I hope we didn't pay too much for him, and now we can't get a linebacker or a center in the free agency because we spent it on the punter. As long as we didn't do that, I'm cool with it because, at the end of the day, he's a guy who doesn't hurt you. He's decent. He gets the job done. And if we're not paying too much, then I'm all for it.
So you look at Kevin Huber's stats, had the most gross yards in punting yards last season of his career, second most punts of his career, which that's not a great stat, but whatever. He had the most net yards of his career. He had the tied for the second best, I believe, net overall average of yards per kick. The second highest net average in terms of yards per kick. He had the fewest touchbacks of his career last season with just 3. And he had the second highest amount of punts inside the 20 with 32. So those are all pretty nice statistics. Issues, there was one blocked last year, and there was a return for a touchdown last year. The return for the touchdown was against Jacksonville. Jaden Mickens took that one to the house. And so that, although that's not all on the punter, obviously there is some blame to be had there. So, overall, I think veteran guys at your special teams positions are usually the way teams prefer to go. And that's why Chicago chased after Huber. That's why the Bengals have valued him. My guess is after this contract, it's probably going to be calling it a career for Kevin Huber. He's drafted in 2009. Punters obviously have a longer shelf life, but my guess is that this would probably be the last contract he gets. Kudos to him. And the Bengals, he's a local guy. I'm sure he preferred to stay. And, it would seem that the Bengals have their punter for the foreseeable future. And, he was, believe it or not, and this is kind of a good problem, he was one of their higher profile guys that was set to hit free agency this year. And I say higher profile because he does have a Pro Bowl to his name. So I mean, they re-signed a Pro Bowl punter, so got to give them credit for that. And special teams is often an overlooked aspect of the game, and I don't really see a problem with it. I think I'm pretty pleased with it, and this is kind of one of those things that we saw last year, Scott, in the draft where, okay, get a kicker. Now, if they lose, if the Bengals lost Kevin Huber in free agency, they draft a punter. And then do they bring in a veteran and then you end up cutting the draft pick and you lose a draft pick that you know what I mean?
Well, and the thing too, like you're saying, yeah, everyone can say, hey, let's add a punter. Well, we're probably not the only team thinking, hey, let's add a punter if we let him go. There's probably 4 or 5 other teams. And then it's the question of, because everyone says, oh, just let him go. We'll add so-and-so in the draft. Well, yeah, it's great until you figure, okay, these 5 other teams are thinking the same thing. Only one of them is going to get so-and-so. And then, so you may get the 5th or 6th best punter. And at that point, you're entering do you want to enter camp with just one guy who's like the 5th or 6th best guy? And then you're sitting there watching, cut down day, hoping to get someone better. So you avoid that situation. Now, that being said, if, there's some stud elite punter, if, Shane Leckler or something is there in the draft this year, and you want to grab him, you can still grab him and, cut Huber. It'd be kind of silly, but you could, if you feel there's a guy there who's that good. I mean, it doesn't preclude you from getting him. But at least it prevents you from being required to take that position. I mean, you have 11 picks, you have to use them on something, but it's kind of nice knowing you have the flexibility. You could trade them up and down if you want to grab players who you feel the best players. You don't feel obligated. Hey, we have to grab a punter and we have to grab it by round 5 or 6 or something to ensure that we make up for what we lost in Huber. So it is nice and that's one of the things, like we've said before, and it's, you never want to enter the draft with glaring holes. You want to be able to use free agency to at least have a basic fieldable roster. So when the draft comes, you don't feel obligated to reach for players. And this is one less position that they would possibly have to reach for.
Agreed. And Huber is now in Cincinnati again. Let's hope he doesn't take another cheap shot to the jaw or anything like that, and he can stay healthy and end up continuing having a pretty solid career that he's had so far. So the acquisitions or reacquisitions at this point for the Cincinnati Bengals is Cordy Glenn, the big one, the offensive tackle from the Buffalo Bills, acquired in a trade, and re-signing Kevin Huber, their punter, in free agency on the first day of free agency. Now, if you're catching a theme here, we're going to slowly transition from the really positive to the unknown to maybe some negative and maybe some rumors and whatnot. So I guess the unknown now, Scott, are, and I really the lack of interest in guys like Tyler Eifert and Russell Bodine, at least to this point. I think we can all sit here and kind of say tongue-in-cheek, well, duh, Russell Bodine, we know why. But Eifert, we kind of thought it was going to be one way or the other, right? We thought it was going to be someone's going to throw a ton of cash at him and, he could have a career renaissance somewhere. Or, teams are going to be very wary of him because of back issues and arm issues and all kinds of stuff and all of the missed time. We've talked about it a lot, but are you surprised at, I guess there's a two-pronged question I want to ask you. Are you surprised at the lack of interest? And by the way, we did get a question on Twitter from Carlos Andre kind of relating to this, and I'll get to that in a second too. But are you surprised at the lack of interest in those two players? And do you think that one or both, because of the lack of interest, will come back to the Bengals probably on something that's relatively team-friendly in terms of a contract?
As far as Bodine, I cannot say I'm surprised at all because I don't know what he's looking for. I mean, obviously he's been a starter. So if he's looking for second year starter money, then he's kind of crazy. If he's just looking for any sort of contract, then even that I'm still not too surprised just because he has been so horrible. And, you can talk about, well, he's been a 4-year starter. And I think part of that might be Paul Alexander, who's probably the one person who would have signed him. But obviously, if he's in Dallas and they have Travis Frederick, why are you going to sidetrack, Russell Bodine? So that as far as that goes, I have absolutely no surprises with Bodine not being signed or not even being mentioned. Eifert, on the other hand, that really surprises me because you look at someone like Tyler Eifert, and granted, he has played in less than half the games possible in his career. He only has 2 of 5 seasons where he played more than half the year. So you're not going to pay a ton of money in general for a guy who's had multiple injuries, who misses a ton of time with different ailments. And if it's one thing that kind of came up once or twice and you kind of have it fixed, that's one thing, but it's always something falling apart, whether it's an ankle up, whatever it is. It's just always something, and it's not a good sign. That being said, his one good year in 2015 when he played 13 games. I think he led all tight ends in touchdowns that year with 13. He had more touchdowns per reception than anyone that year, even outside of yardage, had better numbers than Rob Gronkowski. And his ability to get open is, against safeties, what he did in the red zone. He was a great player in 2015. And we saw that, hey, when this guy's healthy, he is a great player. And you have to assume someone, at least I thought somebody would have thrown, incentive-laden 1 or 2 year deal. Hey, we're going to pay you like a Jordan Reed, a Travis Kelce, someone like that. But very incentive that you have to hit these, play some big games, get so many yards, so many whatever. But if you do, you're going to be getting a ton of money. And you look at what, even guys like Julius Thomas, when he signed his contract, when he left Denver, he got a ton of money from Jacksonville. So very surprised that Eifert, someone's not throwing something like that at him. And I think the question becomes, okay, if that doesn't happen, I'd love to see him come back to Cincinnati and get, some sort of team-friendly deal. You lock him up for a couple of years, give him, big piles of cash if he can play, if he's healthy. And honestly, it reminds me a lot of Andre Smith. When he first hit free agency, he had his 4 years in Cincinnati. He was hurt the first 2, missed a lot of time because he kept coming into camp out of shape. The Bengals didn't pick up his 5th-year option. That 4th year, he had a great year. Pro Football Focus, I think, said he was the best right tackle in all of football. And Bengals fans like, man, this guy's really good. He hits free agency, crickets. I guess nothing. He comes back to Cincinnati, and I think Bengals fans were pretty surprised. Like, wow, this guy finally put it together. He was a number 6 overall pick. He looked great. He came to camp in shape. He was motivated because he was playing for that money, and no one went for him. So it's almost like that again, where hey, we've seen this guy. We know what he can do when he's healthy. He's a very good player. I'm surprised no one else wants him, but if they don't, I think Bengals, would love to say, yeah, if we can get this guy back and not break the bank for a guy who, can't, if he's on the field, then he's phenomenal. If he's not, as long as you're not paying too much, you're not out anything. And it's just, I guess I'm kind of rambling, but I'm very surprised that no one's throwing anything his way, especially when we've seen what a really good tight end can do for an offense.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised either by Bodine. I think that's kind of a that seems to be probably something that's like a one-team type of bidding war. It's kind of the Bengals maybe just bidding against themselves, but I fully expect to see him back for better, for worse, and maybe that doesn't mean that the Bengals won't add an interior lineman in free agency or the draft, to maybe compete with him, but they've put out a lot of quotes, both from Duke Tobin and from Marvin Lewis, kind of saying how much they like him and how much they want him back because of durability. And I guess they seem to prize availability over a lot of other traits, if that's what they're looking at in terms of bringing back Russell Bodine. I am surprised a bit about the lack of interest in Tyler Eifert. And, you see a guy like Trey Burton, he gets picked up by somebody, and the Packers get Jimmy Graham, and maybe Eifert's just kind of the afterthought a little bit, and maybe there are some good and some active days that occur after the first day, so we don't want to get too knee-jerk reactions. But this is just me, I don't have sources on this or anything, but I think, and I've said this on the program before, I think Eifert wants to stay in Cincinnati if the price is right and if it's an agreeable deal. Maybe it's even a lucrative 1 year deal where he can kind of play it out, and then both sides after 2018 can say, okay, this is what happened, and either if he plays well, he can get a big payday somewhere, or if he doesn't, then it is what it is. But something as little as a Instagram video on his account. He was at I think I said this a couple episodes ago, but he was at a local area, Cincinnati area high school basketball game with his position coach during the off season. And, he's throwing out other stuff now on his social media with, saying I'm healthy, I feel great, and good for him. And I understand he's trying to pump himself up a little bit. But I don't know. I just, something tells me he's going to end back up in Cincinnati unless there's some, kind of off the wall deal or something like that. I just think I think he wants to be there. I think he's comfortable there. And frankly, I want him back. Even though the injuries have been frustrating, particularly the last couple of years, there is no doubt of what kind of weapon he is when he's out there. Now, maybe the Bengals need to supplement that with a Croft extension as a security blanket. Maybe they need to draft another tight end in the draft as another developmental guy. I don't know, but I think the Bengals should keep him, not overpay for him per se, but I'd like to see him back.
Yeah, I just took a quick peek at the I guess basically a list of tight ends, and I'm looking at guys who I'd rather have other than Eifert. Grunk, as far as their health, their age, their whatever, I'd say Gronkowski, Kelsey, Zach Ertz, Greg Olsen, and for me, that's basically it. Everyone else, I think Eifert is just as good or better, and I think he's in that top group too. So if you can get a top 5 NFL tight end who's just sitting there that no one's moving on because he's hurt, and maybe this guy's perpetually hurt, but then you have some guys who just happen to have some really we've been I think we're old enough, we've seen it go both ways, where you see a guy's hurt from day one and they're just always hurt. You see other guys who are hurt, they get over it and they're never hurt again. And that could be a thing with Eifert too. It could be, okay, he just had a few really lousy luck, injury in the Pro Bowl, and some of the things that just kind of happened, and okay, and he always passed those, and because when he came back, he doesn't look like he's losing a step. He still looks like he's the same red zone target, still able to beat safeties, still able to be a presence on the field. He's still a decent blocker. So yeah, I mean, if he came back, I think all in all, there would be no reason not to be excited about that.
So we usually wait for listener questions at the end of the show, but since so many of the questions we're getting tonight kind of coincide with a lot of the news we're covering, I want to ask you a couple questions we received here. This is the one I was telling you about. Carlos Andre, do you think that Glenn's impact in the cap, Cordy Glenn's impact on the cap, will affect the Eifert situation? Do you think at this point that there are some real chances of him staying? I said my piece a bit about him staying, but do you think, though, I mean, we've seen now Jeff Hobson put out stuff that is saying, the Bengals are really struggling now that they added Cordy Glenn, which I'm going to do a mini rant, but I think that's absolutely ludicrous. You see teams that just continue to do deals and some of them aren't wise, and that's, okay. But I don't know, man. Like you kind of keep the guys you want to keep, and you pay the guys you want to pay, and almost every other team does it and is able to stay out of salary cap hell. The other thing, in regards to this question that's really weird to me is the Bengals are talking about extensions for Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap. Great, it's great, but they're entering like their 9th season. I mean, and yes, Geno Atkins is still very productive, probably their best defensive player. Carlos Dunlap kind of had a little bit of a lull in production last year, but still a valuable guy on the defensive line, and guys you want to keep for the rest of their careers. But I don't understand why that is kind of taking you out of other areas, or at least that's the image they're projecting. You're talking about guys who are entering their 9th or 10th season here, and you want to extend them, but you can't get other starting players, whether it's a linebacker or a center, to upgrade your team. To me, that's kind of nonsensical.
Yeah, I think if you look at last year's starters, guys who currently right now are unsigned. So positions, I guess, holes you have center Russell Bodine, Kevin Minter at inside linebacker, and then Tyler Eifert, your tight end. Granted, he only started 1 or 2 games, but still, you have those 3 positions. Of those 3, center and linebacker, you could argue they and even with Eifert, they have enough depth. They have enough guys on the roster. They could fill it if they need to. They have a Westerman. They have a Redmond. They even have TJ Johnson, who's not very good, but they do have a center. Inside linebacker, they have some guys who played linebacker last year. Obviously, you have 11 picks in the draft. You can fill that. Eifert, yes, you have Croft, you have CG Uzama. So you could target one of those three positions and throw some money at it and then say, well, we have enough in depth on our roster to kind of Band-Aid cover the next two positions. And so the question is, well, of those three, of guys that are available in free agency, which one would be the priority as far as money goes? And if you don't think there's a great elite linebacker, I know some people have looked at someone like maybe Tahir Whitehead because he was with the Lions where Terrell Austin came from. He might be a guy they might throw some money at a little bit. I can't imagine spending too much. There's not a whole lot as far as centers out there. And you have several good ones in the draft this year. So, that money very well could be spent on Tyler Eifert, especially, if you're looking at a incentive type contract. So if you give him an incentive contract and he makes all the money, I mean, that's exactly what you want to happen. You want to have to pay him, $7, $8, $9 million on an incentive based contract, because that means he played all year. He had a great season. He made a Pro Bowl. He had his 10 touch. That's exactly what you want to do. And if it's he only makes, a fifth of what he could have made, then you're not really out anything. And as far as the Geno Atkins Dunlap thing, I do think Geno is someone they need to look at extending beyond next year, because on defensive tackle, they don't have a whole lot. They have Billings, who's still he's still super young. They did just sign that kid who was with Baker, who was with the Tampa Bay. There have been some concerns about his attitude, his work ethic, so forth. So you don't know which version of him you're getting. Outside of that, you have Glasgow, who's a solid, rotational guy, but that's about it. But on defensive end, you have guys like Willis, who seems pretty good. You have Carl Lawson, who obviously was a great pass rusher. You still have guys like Michael Johnson. I want to say of Chris Smith, but obviously he's gone. So like you said, those guys at some point are starting to get to that age where you don't want to be throwing, multi-million-dollar contracts at guys, into their late 30s if their production's dropping. But of those, I think Eifert makes the most sense, because when he's healthy, he is a game changer, elite player. You're not getting that from anyone sitting out there in free agency at center or at linebacker.
I'm glad you brought up Chris Baker, because that was something that we didn't put on our pre-show notes, Scott. We had so many other things that were like top of mind from the first day of free agency and everything. Quickly.
That happened so long ago.
I know. It was 4 days ago, 5 days ago, something like that. Quickly, though, your thoughts on him, as there were a couple of years with the Redskins where he was a dominant player and he did not get nearly as much national run that he should have. Really, I think it was from 2014 to 2016. He had some really nice years there, and went to Tampa Bay and on a deal there, and that didn't work out. And obviously, the Bengals kind of did their bargain bin deal. Former productive guy coming off of a poor year, and a guy that they got on a one-year deal worth about $3 million, and probably a guy that won't play every down, but will start and or rotate at that other defensive tackle spot with guys like Andrew Billings and Ryan Glasgow and stuff. So your thoughts on the Baker signing quickly before we kind of move on to some other news and notes.
I guess my one thought with Baker is he had these 2 great years in Washington. His last 2 years were very good. And I think 15 and 16, very interesting. Washington really made no effort to re-sign him, despite him having those 2 great years. Like you mentioned, he was a dominant presence inside, arguably their best defensive lineman. Still in his prime, they let him walk. And so it makes you wonder, okay, why would you let someone like that walk? And some of the reports, if you do some digging, there seem to be some rumblings that he wasn't much of a great locker room guy. He didn't give a lot of effort. He had a bad attitude. He was, someone teammates didn't really care for. He goes to Tampa, gets the big contract, plays 1 year, has a bad year, and you hear some of the reasons why they cut him. It's the exact same stuff from Washington. Bad attitude. He was very lackadaisical, didn't put the time and effort in, and it just showed on the field. So now you have a guy who has a track record of these issues, comes to another team, a third team. And so the question is that just who he is? Is he a guy who just has these this baggage, has these issues. Bengals are like, man, this guy just doesn't try. He's not, or is he a guy who, for whatever reason, just had some bad situations, and this is the one where things are going to turn around? He's going to return to that form, because obviously, like, when he puts his mind to it, he can be a great player. So if you're getting that Chris Baker, then yeah, it's a heck of a deal. If you're getting the guy who comes, the last two teams had no interest in keeping, then yeah, I'd hate to think we're using up cap space that we could use for an Eifert or someone for a guy that we're going to say, oh, this guy's a bum, he's lazy, we don't want him. But without knowing him personally, you kind of hope the Bengals coaches did their due diligence. Maybe they see something that they can turn around what obviously didn't work for him, that made the Redskins want to get rid of him and made Tampa want to get rid of him.
Yeah, I think it was Jim Haslett, the team's current linebacker coach, and I want to say maybe it was Jacob Burney, but a couple of Bengals coaches worked with him or are familiar with him from Washington. So, I from that standpoint, obviously they felt comfortable with adding him. I was always a big Pat Sims guy. I really thought he was an underrated player, but he's now entering, I guess 12th season, and who knows if he'll even get to play anymore. But always was a decent to solid player for the Cincinnati Bengals, a rotational guy. The Bengals now have gotten a few years younger at that spot. Now they have Andrew Billings developing, and if Baker does have effort issues or what have you, maybe his life will be a little easier playing next to a guy in Geno Atkins, where he could still be productive. And I don't know. The Bengals, I'm going to kind of echo a sentiment in our live YouTube chat from Michael Myers, who kind of said, if you can stop the run, welcome to Cincy. The Bengals last year were uncharacteristically bad at stopping the run. They were number 30 overall in terms of rush yards per game. Kind of a major disparity between their run defense and their pass defense. I think the pass defense was number 9 overall. So, I mean, there was kind of a big gap there, and the Bengals under Mike Zimmer and for the most part under Paul Gunther were always pretty decent against the run, and last year they just got gashed, and I think that defensive tackle spot had something to do with it. I think some age and lack of talent at certain linebacker spots has something to do with it, and regardless, the Bengals made a needed move, and that in itself, along with the Glenn trade, opens up their draft. It opens up their draft. So, defensive tackle was maybe on the table at 12. A guy like, I think it's Vita Vea, the guy from University of Washington, the big defensive tackle, he was maybe a guy that was being kicked around. But obviously the Bengals are pretty comfortable with Billings and Baker and Glasgow, along with Atkins. And if you remember, they had undrafted free agent Josh Tupou, a guy who was like 350 pounds, giant guy, got active in some games towards the end of the year, but he ended up getting arrested this offseason. So, probably not a guy that the Bengals can count on from a number of different standpoints. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, joined by Scott Schulze. We're going to be here for a little while longer talking about other free agency happenings. There is a lot on the table, and we thank you so much for joining us live. We've had an awesome past couple of episodes. We missed you last week, Scott. We did have Joe Goodberry as our guest last week, and then the week before that, we had Rebecca Toback, who is with SB Nation and was at the NFL Combine. So really, really fun past couple of episodes after things are slowed down a bit in the January, February months, but man, the last few episodes have been a blast, and we appreciate you tuning in. If you can't join us live at Cincy Jungle or on YouTube, you can get the program. You can download it on iTunes. You can download it on SoundCloud. As I mentioned, Cincy Jungle, YouTube are options as well. And you can get in contact with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. I'm debating where to go. I'm keeping you on your heels tonight, Scott. We kind of had a lineup, and just kind of the way the ebbs and flows of the show are going, we've kind of changed it up. I know you're kind of probably a little limited on time based on what time it is currently on your end. So I want to go to the Vontaze Burfict trade rumors, because I think you have a very interesting take here, and I haven't heard it, but I think I've heard kind of the overarching premise of it. In case you didn't know, and now these aren't some very credible sources or very, it's not your Adam Schefter, it's not your Ian Rappaport, that sort of thing. But some folks in the media have thrown out the news that they have some sources that the Bengals might be shopping Vontaze Burfict to the Oakland Raiders for a trade. There's been a lot of talk in the YouTube chat about this. A lot of people seem to be unhappy. There are people unhappy about the idea of them moving Burfict. There are people in the camp of, hey, good riddance. And I guess we'll kind of combine this with the Pac-Man Jones option not being picked up. Maybe that's a message to the locker room as well on a number of fronts. And maybe if Burfict is moved, this is some sort of message. We don't, I'm not really sure about that. But I want to continue to say that this is a very tentative type of piece of news going out there. Jim Ozarski of the Cincinnati Enquirer kind of said something on Twitter earlier that he didn't really know anything about it. Kind of made a little bit of a joke and a jab at the folks putting it out there. But there are a couple of sources, and you can read the story on CincyJungle.com. It's up there right now. There are a couple of people out there saying that the Bengals might be trading Vontaze Burfict to the Raiders. Obviously, Paul Guenther there now would make sense on that front. Your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I'll just make it kind of quick because obviously we have no validation. When it first came out, I think it was like 4 or 5 hours ago. I think it's a local sports news guy from California somewhere. When it first saw, I was very interested in it. I know a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, what the heck? You can't get rid of. And when he's at his best, when, Burfict is on the field, he's healthy, he's playing, he's not suspended. He is a dynamic, game-changing, totally changes the face of the defense. The things he can do, his instincts are just phenomenal. The way he can read and diagnose and, cover in coverage and as a run stopper, just a great defensive player. And probably one of the best I've seen in a Bengals uniform in many years. That being said, with suspensions, with concussions, with whatever, injuries, he's only played in 36 out of the past 64 games for the Bengals. So he's not played a whole lot. And as much as you want to say he's great, you aren't that great when you're not on the field. And the thing Marvin Lewis was saying about Bodine that, he's held, he's on the field for every play, and you can't say it with Burfict because he's out. And the way the league watches him, the way the refs watch him, every little ticky-tacky foul, you're losing 15 yards, or he's getting suspension. And with the number of concussions he's had, that he's basically one play, one concussion, one questionable hit away from being out for half a year. And then the question is, if you can get some sort of value for a guy who is so who is a great when he's healthy, but at this point he's already in his upper 20s. He's very unlikely to play a lot of games, and more likely to be close to out of the league because of all the suspensions and all the concussions and everything. If someone's saying, hey, we'll give you good value for this guy, I think you'd be a fool not to take it, because if you can trade him with the promise of how good he is when he plays 16 games. When he's a 16, when he's on the field for 16 games, he is worth every bit of whatever Oakland will give you for him. The problem is that's not the Burfict we have. We have the Burfict who plays 7 games, 8 games, is good when he plays, but doesn't play a whole lot. He'll get a couple bad fouls. The guy that you're getting over in the grand scheme of a year just isn't giving you that much production. So if Oakland's willing to overpay you for him, I think you absolutely have to take it. Does that give the Bengals a big hole linebacker? Yes, absolutely. But if they're giving you enough, that's something you can try to make up for. The other alternative is, okay, you keep him on the roster, you keep him for a couple of years. Hopefully he makes it that long before he gets more suspensions, more fines, and it opens up a ton of money. We were talking about signing Eifert and some of this cap. He's getting something like $10 million a year or whatever for the next few years. Opens a ton of cap room, and if you can get good value for him, I'd say, yeah, by all means, trade for him. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be very substantiated, so right now it seems to be a pipe dream.
Yeah, I mean, you would need to get a very big haul from the Oakland Raiders in order for this to make sense on a lot of levels. Now, I understand the suspension, the injuries, all that stuff that comes with a Vontaze Burfict, but he is kind of an enforcer. He is kind of, when he's out there, he's an impact player. And we've seen it. And when he's played full, like Tyler Eifert, when he's played full seasons, he's been a Pro Bowl player, and he's been a guy that the team can rely on as an impact type of player on the defense. Now, I don't know. First of all, we don't know how valid this rumor is. I want to keep pushing that on there, but I mean, it's out there. I don't know how valid it is, but it would take a lot of capital from the Raiders in order for this to make sense on the Bengals end. And I did see, some commenter, I believe, on Cincy Jungle who had said, I mean, essentially, if they lose Burfict, you have Jordan Evans, Nick Vigil, and Vinny Ray as your starting linebacker core as we would sit here today without Vontaze Burfict. And that's not, I don't mean to pick on those guys, but that's not great. That's not a great sounding linebacker core. So, I mean, it is out there, and there's a connection that, as I said, makes sense. Paul Gunther's always been a big Burfict guy, and I think Lewis has been too. That Lewis was instrumental. If you've read a lot of things and heard a lot of things, Lewis was instrumental in getting Burfict to the Bengals, and it's paid off in a lot of senses, but it's also hurt them in some as well. So very interesting type of piece of news out there in terms of a big name player of the Bengals who could be shopped for a trade. And, I like it or not, in terms of Burfict potentially moving on, I mean, there might be some sort of, I mentioned this going into this segment, whether it's a message or whether it's just a different direction now that Terrell Austin is the defensive coordinator. But Pac-Man Jones's option was not picked up. He might come back on a cheap deal, maybe to primarily return kicks. I don't know. But he is not in their long-term plans anymore after signing a pretty lucrative contract for his age, especially right after what happened in the postseason game what he was involved in. So, it would seem that maybe the Bengals, if this is true, again, big if, maybe the Bengals are sending some sort of message. Maybe they're trying to purge the roster. Maybe they're even trying, Vontaze Burfict signed a big deal last offseason, a big extension with the team. Maybe they're trying to create more space to make some more moves. I don't know, but this is something definitely to keep your eye on, whether it ends up being completely false or something that, has some legs to it. We'll see. But it's out there and very interesting. And it was very interesting to see it come through the wire on Wednesday.
Well, just one thing to throw out. Paul Gunther's the defensive coordinator, right?
Uh-huh.
For Oakland?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I guess there is that connection. And a couple of things I was reading. I guess Gruden has been a big fan of Burfict as far as Monday Night Football. So he said very many glowing things in the past on different games about how great Burfict is. You have the Bengals defensive coordinator. I see how you could put the pieces together but until we get, I do want to see something a little more substantiated.
Yeah. And it was, let me see who it was Christopher Higdon in the YouTube chat said the Raiders are a month away from landing Edmonds or Roquan Smith. They don't need Burfict. Yeah, the Raiders, I believe, hold the number 10 overall pick, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, they could get a guy like that. Who knows? I mean, I think, unfortunately, for some of the folks that wanted the Bengals to draft Roquan Smith or Edmonds out of the draft here, moving back to 21 takes them out of those sweepstakes unless they move back up or, somehow somebody has an incredible slide that isn't foreseen there. So, I mean, it's just an interesting piece of news. It's a rumor, and it's not like some Joe Schmo is totally putting it out there. I mean, these are guys in the media that say they have sources, but like I said, it's also not the Matt Millers, the Adam Schefters, the Ian Rappaports, guys who continuously break news that, are credible sources. So we'll see what happens here. Scott, AJ McCarron is no longer a Bengal. He is with Buffalo. He signed a 2-year deal worth $10 million. Now, I think this is foreseen. I think, we can sit here and say, okay, well, yeah, now the Bengals probably going to go in the draft and find a backup quarterback, what have you. This is not something, once he won that arbitration, this is not something that's, it hasn't been something that would become a surprise. So I guess what I want to ask you here is, how badly does the missed trade opportunity hurt now? When, again, kind of expected he'd move on and all of that, but how bad does that trade sting now that you don't have the guy anymore and you don't have the picks? I think it was a second and a third round pick from the Browns that were offered. So, and we can go back and we can say, well, the Bengals kind of messed that one up. The Browns kind of messed that one up. Maybe it was both. Some people point to the Browns, but to me, this sucks. He's gone, and the Bengals don't have anything to show for it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the day after, or maybe the minute after it hit 4:00 back on the trade deadline, when the trade was not made. I think most Bengals fans were pretty disappointed because we knew McCarron was probably going to be gone one way or another. You missed out on a high second and a high third. I think it was Cleveland's original picks in the second and third round, which made a high second and a high third. For a guy you were going to lose anyway. So it's, I guess, kind of culminating that, it's a bummer then. It's still a bummer, 3 months later now that we have nothing. Now that being said, they probably will get a supplemental pick down the road. So I guess they have that, and they love their supplemental picks. Not as good as getting, 2 picks for him, that second and third round pick. But I think we all kind of knew he was gone. The question I think this opens up now is, what do they think of Jeff Driscoll? Because if they were willing to trade him in the first place, it makes you think they obviously felt they had something in Jeff Driscoll. The folks that were following training camp very closely this past season, were basically raving that Jeff Driscoll was out playing AJ McCarron, and not just, in these read options, but actually throwing the ball, reading coverage, doing checkdowns, accuracy, hitting receivers. And so if that is the case, maybe they have something in Driscoll, and it's perfectly fine. We lose McCarron because we have an adequate backup. If we don't, then the question is, okay, what do they do for that backup position? Do they draft a quarterback? And if they do, it raises an interesting dilemma. You're sitting there at 21 or wherever. Let's say you don't move up or down. You have, 5 guys who are considered first-round picks this year. You have, Lamar Jackson and Darnold and Rosen and Allen and so forth, and so Baker Mayfield. So the question is, there's a good chance all 5 of them could be taken in the first 10 or 15 picks as these teams go quarterback crazy, or it could be 1 or 2 of them slip, kind of like back when Alex Smith and Aaron Rodgers were in the draft. The famous story, no one knew who was going to go number 1. Smith went number 1. Aaron Rodgers fell and fell and fell and fell, and then until finally the Packers took him. And of course, the rest is history. And so the question is, if one of these guys falls, and we don't know, it might sound silly saying one of them could fall. One of them could, let's say Darnold, or I don't know, Allen, or someone falls, come draft, first day the Bengals sitting there at 21. This, I think, makes it much more likely they possibly could take someone like him, because you've now fixed the gaping hole at left tackle, depending on what they do in free agency as far as linebacker, or what they do with the rest of the offensive line. If a guy you have rated as a top 5 quarterback, and if you're a team that constantly preaches best player available, well, your best player available, the most important position is quarterback. And if that's the best player available and you're sitting there at 21 and he's there, I think it opens up a chance for them to do something, to actually draft a guy with the mindset that, hey, we have AJ Green or Andy Dalton for 3 more years. He's on a very team-friendly contract. We can put this guy in there, let him sit for a year or 2. Maybe after the first year, we're like, wow, this guy's so much better. We can let Dalton go. This guy could become the starter. So I think it opens up an opportunity for that. So I like that possibility, that they now have some luxury to do that. Whereas I think if they had McCarron, if he had lost the arbitration hearing and he was with the Bengals, I don't think there's any way the Bengals would do that. If they had Dalton and McCarron, under contract, that they would grab a Allen or whoever that might fall to them at 21. And of course, the odds are no one does fall to them, but I think it opens that up. If they don't do that, then the question is, do you sign a third tier, veteran kind of journeyman backup guy, or just ride with Driscoll? And I'm assuming at this point they're going to ride with Driscoll. I don't know who else is out there that you would say, yeah, this is a guy is so good, we absolutely have to have him to back up Dalton. Because at this point, most of those guys are gone unless you want someone like Geno Smith, or Blaine Gabbert, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be draft, and I think it's probably going to be a late day 2, probably early day 3 type of pick. Unless, like you said, someone crazy falls to them at 21, should they stay there. One of the big 5, if they're there. Some people have very mixed opinions on Lamar Jackson, but who could be the most likely guy to be there of the big 5 quarterbacks. But, it's very unlikely that the Bengals use that pick on a quarterback. I think they probably look at that second or third tier of quarterbacks in the rookie class, whether it's Mason Rudolph or Luke Falk or, I've seen the Kyle Laulette name. The kid from Memphis is another guy that's being thrown around. So, there are options there, and that's probably where they're going to go because they are committed to Andy Dalton, and they are, going to probably get someone like him to be their backup because they that way, if Dalton does go down, they won't need to change their offense that much. So that's the deal. 2 years, up to $10 million for AJ McCarron to the Buffalo Bills, and probably a very wise move by them. They just traded Tyrod Taylor to the Browns, which is also pertinent to the Bengals, but they have got Nathan Peterman, a rookie they drafted last year who did not do very well in limited playing time for them. And then they'll probably try and use that pick that they acquired from the Bengals, the number 12 overall, to move up and get a quarterback if they can. There's just a few more things we can talk about. Scott, I'd love to get your opinion. If you need to get going, totally understand. But the Bengals did lose. We already talked kind of about Adam Jones, his option not being picked up, but they lost the Smith brothers, if you will, Andre Smith and Chris Smith. Andre Smith got a pretty lucrative. Actually, both guys got pretty lucrative deals where they went. Andre Smith went to the Cardinals on a 2-year deal, I believe, and Chris Smith got a 3-year deal worth about 14-15 million. So he's getting about $5 million per. Good for both of them that they could cash in and get something. But I'm not too brokenhearted about Andre Smith at this point for the reasons we talked about with Cordy Glenn and who they have at the backup offensive line spots. I think some people are a little bit more hurt about Chris Smith leaving. Had a pretty decent year last year with the Bengals as a rotational guy and a guy that could kick inside, but they both seem to be pretty replaceable, I would think.
Yeah, I think of the two, I would agree. I think Smith is the bigger loss. Well, okay. Chris Smith is the bigger loss. That being said, I've always been an Andre Smith fan. I know a lot of people have been very negative on him because his first 2 years he did show up out of shape. It didn't seem like he was really taking his offseason serious. The shirtless 40 kind of walking out of the combine. He had some issues, but when he was on the field, he was a great run blocker. He was a solid pass protector. As long as he wasn't going up against speed guys, he was a very good defensive or offensive lineman all around. I thought he was very underrated for his career. That being said, he is a little older. The money the Cardinals paid him, I don't think there's any way the Bengals match that. Especially where, for the player he is at this point in his career. Chris Smith, I thought did a very good job. He kind of reminded me of Wallace Gilberry, a guy they got in town on the cheap who did very well as a rotational player who was rushing the quarterback and did a very good job of doing that. That being said, this is kind of reminiscent of the Frosty Rucker or the Andrew Hawkins thing where the Bengals have a solid, backup rotational guy and the Browns throw a ton of money at him to become a starter. It'll be interesting to see how he does as a starter. I know with Gilbert, it didn't work out all that well. Hawkins and Rucker, when they went to Cleveland, had some success. They weren't exactly phenomenal. They never really seemed to play up to the money they were given. I'm assuming Chris Smith, probably a similar situation where he's a solid player, not worth the money the Browns are going to give him. Definitely wasn't money the Bengals were going to give him. And, it's not like you're losing, Carlos Dunlap or Geno Atkins. But that being said, he was a nice, solid rotational player. And so you kind of hope the guys they have to replace him, the Lawsons, the guys they drafted last year and the guys they have coming in are up to the task of doing as well as Smith did. And of course that remains to be seen. So the two, I think Chris Smith, I keep wanting to say Smith, just Chris Smith was the bigger loss. But I was a little disappointed to see him go, but yeah, we'll just have to see what their plan is to replace him. If it's the kid from Kansas State they got last year, or if this means maybe more playing time for Carl Lawson, which I don't think is a bad thing. And that might force the Bengals' hand and say, well, we have to play these second-year players more. We can't just put Lawson in when it's a pure rushing down. We have to put him in more than half the snaps. We have to put Willis in a little more. We have to do something. Let's so I'm all for giving the younger guys more of a chance to play. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it's sad to see him go, but it's you'd rather they're going somewhere where they can start and it's not a key cog from the team.
Yeah, they need to add another edge rusher of some kind and someone they feel they can kick inside. Obviously, they added Jordan Willis, Carl Lawson last year in the draft, and they want to see those guys continue to play. Carlos Dunlap's getting up there in age. Michael Johnson's getting up there in age, so they need to get guys that can come in and rush the passer. And, there wasn't a lot to applaud the Bengals about last year, but that trade for Chris Smith was a very good one. And it ended up being a productive one, and it helped his career. He got paid, and good for him. I don't think the Bengals should have paid him, around $5 million a year personally. But if he would have stuck around for $2.5 to $3 million, I wouldn't have been opposed. But is what it is. And Andre Smith and Chris Smith are gone. Adam Jones's option has not been picked up. So that's kind of where we stand right now. Tyler Eifert's still floating out there. Russell Bodine is still floating out there in terms of Bengals internal free agents that are of the bigger name ilk. So we'll see what they do there. There are a couple of questions I'm going to try and get to. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's Scott Schulze. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. And you can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI and the obinsider@gmail.com is our email address. So get in touch with us. I'm not going to touch our good friend Kay Rhodes asked a question about Kaepernick to Cincinnati. I am not touching that one with a 10-foot pole, just for a variety of reasons. And that's my preference. I don't know if you want to touch that one, Scott. We've talked about Kaepernick on this program before, but I don't necessarily want to address it, and I think the Bengals should just probably go into the draft and draft a quarterback.
I don't know. I'm personally in the mindset. I mean, you look at a lot of the people that teams have on their a lot of people who are signed have done some pretty horrible things. And the end of the day, as long as you're not suspended by the league, if you can play, if the team truly thinks you can play, if a team out there thinks this guy has enough talent, enough skill, I think somebody is going to sign you because ultimately they're trying to win and make money. And if we can get you for a low amount of money and we think you're going to help us win, someone is going to sign one of these people. When Ray Rice was let go, I don't think it was purely because of the video. I think it was the video plus the fact he was getting older. He was, becoming one of those 30-year running backs where the production falls. A number of things. Anyway, ultimately, I think if Kaepernick was, and now some owners have come out, like the guy for Houston, for example, have come out and said, we want nothing to do with him. And I get that, they're making a statement. That's something but I think if a player is someone that a team thinks is truly good enough to help them, I think someone's going to sign him. And you look, he's been out for a couple of years, but so is RG3. And they have a very similar skill set, run first quarterbacks who have strong arms, who have questionable traits as far as, accuracy, reading a defense, some of those kind of things that never really seem to improve. I know RG3 did have an injury, but I think if Kaepernick is truly that good of a player, then I think someone would have signed him. And it's I don't know, I don't know. It's kind of odd that it's become a kind of like a rallying cry that, oh, no one's signing him simply because of this. It reminds me of when a few years ago, Michael Sam entered the draft, and I know I'm going on, but he came out as an openly, homosexual male, and teams like, oh, no one's going to draft this guy now. We're going to stay away from him because, the NFL's, they don't want gay people or whatever. And a team ended up taking him. I think there was the Cowboys or Rams or someone they signed him, and he didn't make it out of camp. And I think then the Cowboys might have added him in practice squad, and then he fizzled after a little while. And everyone during the draft was saying, oh, look, everyone hates him. Everyone hates him. They're not drafting him. And no, it wasn't because no one thought he was that good of a talent. And you saw that's why he fell to where he did, and he didn't make a roster. And he couldn't make the cut. And then another team tried him, and he couldn't make. And it's not just a political thing. And I remember when Chris Kluwe was cut, he made some comments politically the year he was cut. But you look at his numbers. He'd been the worst punter in the year for like 2 years in a row. The Vikings got rid of him. He came out and said, oh, they got rid of me because of these political statements. They hate whatever Chris Kluwe was fighting for. Whatever. At the end of the day, if you're that good, if you're a good player, generally teams are, and if you're good and you're not doing anything that the league's going to suspend you for, someone's going to pick you up. Someone's going to sign you. You're going to get a chance somewhere more often than not. So with Kaepernick, I just think it's an issue where enough teams just don't feel he has the skills to do at the football, at that position, what they want him to do. And I would assume the Bengals are probably part of that because obviously it's a guy they could have signed several times over if they wanted to, and they haven't. So I think it is what it is. I think his NFL days are behind him, and I think it's just because that is a very difficult position to play. And that's why you see some of the same guys keep getting recycled as far as the veterans, these Mike Glenn and Josh McCown types, because they at least at some level are good enough to do that. It's a very difficult, kind of like being a pitcher in a major league. That's where you see guys like CC Sabathia pitching in their 45, because it's a very difficult skill. Not many people can do it, but if you can do it, it's something that people are going to be desperate enough they're going to keep bringing you back, and if they're not bringing you back, they probably don't think that you have that those traits that very, very, very few people have.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not going to go all into it, but I'm going to say this: the Bengals have been a team that, unfortunately, for better or for worse, have been kind of really have made headlines, and they've made headlines because of the meltdown in the 2015 wildcard game against the Steelers. They made headlines because they continue to back players with some sketchy past, like Tank Johnson, like Adam Jones. List goes on and on and on and on and on. They were the poster boys of, and now I want to say this, they were the poster boys of being the bad boys of the NFL in the mid and late 2000s. Unfortunately, when something happens now, which is far more rare than it was then, that unfairly gets brought back up. But right or wrong, and this isn't me spewing my political views or whatever, but there is a lot of attention, and there will be a lot of media attention for a team that brings in Colin Kaepernick. And unfortunately, be it because of ownership, lack of staffing, the coaches they have in place, the players they have in the locker room, the Bengals have not shown the emotional fortitude. They have not shown the maturity to be able to handle big-time spotlights, big-time media attention, whatever the case is. And I think just for that, that's not a knock on Kaepernick, his ability, his politics, whatever. I just think the Bengals need to just stay away from that, especially in a year now where there's quote-unquote change. You see Adam Jones being kind of shown the door a little bit. There is this rumor of Vontaze Burfict potentially being shipped away. I think from that reason, I don't think the Bengals and their infrastructure can handle what comes with signing a Colin Kaepernick. I don't think Andy Dalton's career, if you're in Andy Dalton's corner, I don't think Andy Dalton's career could survive a Colin Kaepernick signing. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. Unfortunately, that might be If you think that's unfair in terms of a political thing, me, that's more of a business / what's good for my football team decision. But if you think that's unfair of me or whatever, so be it. I don't think that there are probably a lot of other teams in the NFL who can handle it. The big market teams, a Pittsburgh Steelers type of team that know success and continually are successful. I don't think the Bengals can handle that, and I would like to see them stay away. But we said we'd stay away from that question with a 10-foot pole, but we really went on for that for a little bit. Let's get out of here with this one, Scott, if you've got just another minute. There's more talk about the tight ends, and in the chat, YouTube chat, there was talk about potentially adding Eric Ebron, the recently cut and former first-round pick of the Detroit Lions athletic freak, but has been a major disappointment with that team. And then there was also a question, I believe it was from Moolah Money. The talk of if they keep Eifert and then there's Croft, will there be more 2 tight end sets? Any thoughts on, or I guess that those questions kind of overlap. You know, if you get Ebron and you keep Croft, or you have Eifert and you keep Croft, I mean, do you see more 2 tight end sets, especially with the issues on the offensive line that we've seen over the past couple of years?
I think if they do 2 tight end sets, it's only going to be for blocking. I don't see them running the Aaron Hernandez, Rob Gronkowski kind of thing where you have 2 tight ends and receiving packages. And it's part of the reason is because they have very good receiving running backs with Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon. And then you also have a slew of receivers you're trying to get the ball to with AJ Green, who obviously demands a lot of targets. You have Brandon LaFell, you have John Ross, who at some point you want to get involved. You have Tyler Boyd, who seems to get underused. And then you have guys like Cody Core and Josh Malone, et cetera, Alex Erickson. So you have enough people to get the ball to. You don't really need 2 receiving tight ends. Now, if they feel the offensive line is such a mess and the Jake Fisher, Cedric Broyhe thing doesn't resolve the right tackle, that you have to get someone over there with him to help block. I could see 2 tight ends, like a pure blocking tight end type that you're never going to send out on pass plays. Hopefully it doesn't resort to that. If it does, I'm not quite sure Eric Ebron's the right answer. He's a decent player. I never really understood the first round selection of him back in 2014. He's still fairly young. He's only 24. He's a decent, adequate player. I'd probably put him comparable to someone like a Tyler Croft. I don't think they need both, especially if Ebron wants to get more than, low-end starter, high-end backup money, which he probably does. So, yeah, I guess I'd say no to 2 tight end sets if you're wanting them both to be receivers, and I'd say no to Eric Ebron unless he's going for dirt cheap, which I would be very surprised if he is.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going for dirt cheap, but he's probably going for affordable, I would think. It's a guy that just kind of fizzled out, and maybe a change of scenery, maybe a different scheme can work for him. He tested very well in terms of the athletics at the combine and all of that, and that's kind of what shot him up. He's an athletic freak, but drops and all kinds of stuff have hurt him over the years. Now, it kind of depends on what you're asking or what Moolah was asking with a 2 tight end set. Are we saying, one guy's going to block always and one guy's going to be a receiver? Both guys are going to block, or both guys are going to spread out and be receivers? And if you say both guys are going to spread out and be receivers, then obviously Eifert / Ebron and Croft kind of makes sense. Or, if you're saying one or the other, then you probably need to draft or bring in a guy that has a better blocking prowess to his game than some of the guys that are on the Bengals, or Ebron, Eifert, Uzama. It kind of depends. It really depends on what Bill Lazor wants with the offense and what he foresees the unit going towards this year. There is talent at the position, especially if they bring back Eifert, or even if they sign Ebron, a disappointing guy. I mean, there are guys who can catch and guys who can make some plays in the offense. It's just a matter of, do you want a guy in there who can block? Do you want how frequently are you going to use the tight ends in the passing game? Totally dependent. I don't think either of us have a real answer on that. I would not be opposed to 2 tight end sets, but I think it needs to be two tight end sets that effectively match the skill sets of the guys that they have and effectively match what the Bengals are trying to do on offense. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's Scott Schulze, and he has stayed and burned the midnight oil with us, and we appreciate it. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and CincyJungle.com. You can get in touch with us at BengalsOBI on Twitter. Follow us if you can, and subscribe to all of those channels that I mentioned earlier. And you can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Scott, I don't know if you're out of here or not, but final thoughts on anything? Do you have any goals that the Bengals should be reaching for as free agency moves on here?
I guess the one last thing I would, it's hard to say about what I want from free agency because I really don't know what they view on their roster. I guess for me, that's the biggest thing is what, as far as the interior of the offensive line, one goal would be not re-signing Russell Bodine. But I think a big part of it is with Frank Pollock coming in, what does he think he has with the guys they have there, with the guys like the Trey Hop, the combination of Aboyhi, Fisher, Hopkins, Westerman, Redmond, Kent Perkins, whoever else you want to throw in that mix for the three positions that are currently not held by former University of Georgia players with Cordy Glenn and Bowling at left tackle and left guard. So what do you see? If you think you have three starters out of that group of players, then I think other than maybe looking at some sort of linebacking help, you're pretty much set. If you don't think you have something with one of those three players, then if they see a hole, if they see Aboyhi is maybe a right guard, or maybe they think he can play right tackle or even center, or without knowing what they see in that, I'd like to say I see them grabbing another offensive lineman. Unfortunately, if it's going to be someone like a Marshall Newhouse or somebody. It's not going to be, like when they grabbed Evan Mathis.
He just became available.
Of course, what would probably happen is they'd probably get someone like an Evan Mathis on the cheap and then not play him because they think they have better options. So it's really hard to say what I want to see. I mean, I think we've been Bengals fans long enough to know that we're probably not going to see much until maybe the beginning of April. We'll see them grab a couple bargain basement guys. So until then, I guess. I want to say have expectations. I guess I really don't. At this time, my only expectation is to not finish last in my tournament bracket. So
who do you have winning it?
I think it's one of the V teams. I really haven't followed too closely. My favorite team's not in it this year, so I really haven't. They had a down year, so I really haven't looked too much. I think it's a Virginia Villanova. I don't know. Thomas of Villanova, he was kind of a cool guy. And I think Virginia was named after the Virgin Queen of England. So between the Queen of England and Thomas of Villanova, I think it was one of them. I'd have to go back and double check. I filled out a couple days ago.
Well, USC got robbed of a nomination. I know that much. I know that much. I know they should have been in there. But I hope your bracket treats you well, my friend. And thanks for staying late tonight. I know it's late on your end, but there's just so much to talk about, and there is. There's been a lot of interest, a lot of live viewers tonight, which was awesome. I appreciate you sticking around, even though it's late on your end, and given the great insight that you always do, my friend.
Yeah, it was good. Glad to be here, and hopefully next time we talk, we will be talking about the trade the Bengals made to grab Travis Frederick. For the 21st overall pick.
Yeah, maybe. And by the way, we actually have been the last couple of episodes, if I remember correctly, we've actually been right around that 1 hour mark we always shoot for. It just tonight was just crazy. So thanks to Scott for joining us there. I guess my final thoughts, just real quickly, the Bengals, I think, need to be searching for linebacker help, and both talent and connection wise, affordability. I think Preston Brown, a guy from, and by the way, what a relationship the Bills and the Bengals have been having lately. For a while, it was the 49ers and the Bengals with all the swapping back and forth of players there. And then there was, the Patriots and the Bengals, exchanging players. And now all of a sudden it kind of seems like the Bills and the Bengals are doing a bit of the same thing. But Preston Brown, a Bills linebacker, a versatile guy who's played a number of different positions. He probably could command a decent salary, but I think worth it. And a guy that could play a number of different positions in the Bengals defense. And if there's one thing the Bengals like, it's versatility from their players. And I think he fits that bill, and he's relatively young. Also, Tahir Whitehead, a linebacker with the Lions under Terrell Austin, and a guy the Bengals could not an outstanding player, but a decent one, and a guy who could upgrade their linebacker group, probably be an immediate starter, and a guy that I think the Bengals could be looking at as well. And obviously not, guys at the top of the heap for the day one frenzy, but guys that, over the next few days should be getting some looks. And I think the Bengals might be in the mix for one of those guys, or should be in the mix for one of those guys. Thanks for tuning in tonight, guys. I've already said a bunch of times where you can get our program, so please do. Thanks so much for tuning in live. Thanks so much for hanging with us. I know it's been a busy day. We've talked about a lot, and we appreciate your support. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you next episode. Let's hope that next episode we have even more effective signings of the Bengals that we get to talk about, but we'll see. Thanks, guys.